Hello there, and welcome to Dream Past Diaries. I'm truly glad you've made it here. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're the kind of dreamer who prefers to drift off to the sound of quiet thoughts and forgotten mysteries instead of counting sheep. Either way, tonight's story is yours to enjoy. You don't have to do anything now, just rest. Let your thoughts slow, your breath deepen, and your body grow lighter, as if gravity itself has begun to fade away.
In the early morning light of a small medieval village, the mist lingered over thatched roofs and the uneven dirt streets, and the faint smell of smoke from household fires mingled with the damp earth, settling quietly over the village as if time itself moved more slowly here. The peasants, who had slept on simple straw-filled mattresses, often on the hard floor of a single-room dwelling, would begin their day in a ritual of small, repetitive tasks that defined their existence, each movement deliberate and slow, so as to conserve energy for the labor that awaited them in the fields or the modest gardens that bordered their homes. The preparation of food, though essential, was unhurried, almost meditative in its repetition. The grinding of grains with a hand-operated quern stone, which produced flour that was coarse and uneven, the sound of stone on stone a steady, monotonous rhythm that filled the quiet house. Often, the early meal consisted of a simple pottage, a watery mixture of grains such as barley or oats boiled for hours with bits of vegetables if they were fortunate, perhaps some leeks, onions, or cabbage, the flavor subtle and earthy, the texture thickened slightly by the constant stirring of the pot. On occasion, small legumes like peas or beans were added, but these were reserved for days when the household felt the need for extra nourishment, as legumes were more expensive or more difficult to store properly through damp seasons. Meat, whether pork, beef, or fowl, was a rare luxury, generally consumed only on feast days, religious holidays, or when a neighbor had shared a small portion from a butchered animal. It was salted, smoked, or stewed slowly over the fire, imparting a flavor that was strong but often uneven, as cuts varied and fat rendered inconsistently in the low, smoky heat. Eggs, collected carefully from small flocks of hens, were another occasional supplement, eaten boiled or fried in a small amount of animal fat if available. And bread, usually dark and dense from rye or mixed grains, was the staple, often dipped into the pottage to enrich its bland consistency. Children, who woke earlier than adults, often nibbled on the simplest portions first, small pieces of coarse bread or a spoonful of the cooled pottage, their eyes heavy with the residue of sleep, their movements slow and uncoordinated as they anticipated the more laborious day ahead, which involved tending animals, fetching water from the well or stream, and assisting in the careful preparation of the midday meal. Water itself, drawn from a wooden bucket, often had a faint taste of the surrounding earth, and was consumed cautiously, as storage in ceramic jugs could sometimes render it stale within a few hours. For those living closer to the forested edges of a village, small wild greens, herbs, and edible roots were occasionally gathered to supplement the diet, each plant identified by generations of careful observation, boiled to soften the fibers and release flavors that were subtle but nourishing, or occasionally eaten raw when the tenderness allowed. The monotony of these meals, repetitive and unadorned, reflected the rhythm of village life itself, the sowing and harvesting of crops, the repair of fences and roofs, the tending of livestock, each day passing in a measured cadence, with small variations marking the seasons rather than any individual flourish of creativity in the kitchen. Even the utensils and cooking vessels contributed to the slow pace. Wooden spoons, carved crudely by hand, and clay pots, darkened and cracked from years of exposure to flame, required careful handling and long minutes of gentle stirring or scraping to prevent the contents from sticking or burning. Food preservation was a constant concern, with smokehouses, salt, and storage in cool cellars used to prolong the life of the simplest provisions. Each method involving patience and meticulous attention to detail, for failure could result in spoilage, and the loss of a small quantity of grain or a smoked herring could significantly affect the household stability for days or weeks. Meals were accompanied by little more than water or, occasionally, a thin ale brewed from the same coarse grains that sustained the pottage, a beverage weak in comparison to modern standards, yet considered nourishing and essential, its fermentation slow and careful, producing a mild bitterness that became familiar to the palate over time. Social interactions during these meals were quiet and measured. The family or small group would eat in near silence, the clink of wooden utensils on bowls the only punctuation, conversations consisting mostly of practical instructions for the day's work or brief remarks about the weather and the crops, all exchanged with an economy of words that reflected both the hardships and the simplicity of life. By mid-morning, the remnants of the early meal were stored away carefully, pots scraped and rinsed, and the process of work resumed, each movement deliberate. as though the slow digestion of food mirrored the slow movement of the day itself, a rhythm that demanded patience and acceptance of monotony, qualities as essential to survival as the grains themselves. And so, in this quiet repetition, the peasant's sustenance and daily rituals intertwine seamlessly with the natural cycles of light and shadow, warmth and cold, growth and decay, each meal a reflection of a life measured not in variety or indulgence but in careful preservation, in the quiet satisfaction of having met the basic needs of body and soul, and in the comforting, almost hypnotic predictability of the slow, unchanging rhythms of a medieval village where every bite of pottage, every slice of bread, and every sip of weak ale contributed to the steady pulse of human existence, unhurried and softly relentless, carrying the villagers gently toward the next meal, the next task, and the inevitable return of sleep. By mid-morning, as the sun climbed slowly above the horizon, the rhythm of village life continued in the steady, almost imperceptible cadence that defined the daily existence of the peasants, each movement deliberate and unhurried, each task performed with a quiet attentiveness that bordered on meditation, as if the very act of completing these chores in a slow, careful manner contributed to the health and stability of the household. The preparation of the midday meal was a gradual process, beginning with the inspection of stored grains, which had been carefully kept in earthenware jars or sacks made from rough linen, their surfaces dusted with a fine, pale residue of flour, each kernel observed to ensure that no small rodent or insect had intruded, for such pests, though minor, could disrupt the delicate balance of sustenance in a household reliant on its careful preservation of food. The grains were often rinsed in cool water from the well, stirred slowly in a large wooden bowl, then set aside to soak, softening in preparation for boiling, the sound of water trickling into the bowl a gentle, repetitive background to the quiet murmur of the village outside. Vegetables from the garden, such as cabbages, turnips, leeks, and onions, were harvested with steady hands, roots and leaves cleaned carefully of soil, each leaf inspected and torn or trimmed to remove imperfections, the peeling and chopping done methodically on a wooden board that had been worn smooth over years of use, the knife moving in slow, deliberate strokes, creating a rhythm that matched the gentle sway of the peasants' thoughts as they focused on the task at hand. Occasionally, a small portion of herbs would be gathered, parsley, thyme, or sage, though their availability depended on the season and the care with which previous harvests had been tended, and these were minced painstakingly, their aroma rising faintly in the cool morning air, a subtle addition to the otherwise earthy and modest flavors of the pottage. If the household possessed any preserved legumes, such as peas or beans, they were rinsed and sorted with meticulous attention, the peas dropped one by one into the soaking water to ensure they were whole and free of imperfections. Each legume counted almost subconsciously, the slow, repetitive process itself almost hypnotic. Firewood, carefully chopped the previous day, was arranged in the hearth, small twigs placed beneath larger logs to encourage a steady, even flame, the smoke curling lazily toward the rafters, filling the room with a familiar, calming scent of burning wood and ash, which seemed to settle over the villagers like a protective blanket, keeping them warm and steady as they moved about their chores. The pot, a heavy clay vessel darkened by years of repeated use, was set upon the embers and filled with the soaked grains, water added gradually, each addition stirred slowly to prevent lumps and sticking, the surface of the mixture forming small bubbles that rose and broke with a gentle rhythm, almost like the breathing of the house itself. As the pottage thickened over the slow heat, vegetables were added in a measured manner, each piece placed with care to ensure even cooking, the colors muted but distinguishable, pale green cabbage, off-white leeks, the faint golden hue of a small carrot or turnip. Occasionally, a small portion of salted or smoked meat, if available, would be cut into tiny pieces and allowed to simmer gently, releasing subtle flavors into the thickening broth, though such meat was scarce and used sparingly, the household aware that overuse could mean weeks without another morsel. Bread, shaped the previous evening and baked slowly in a communal oven or hearth, was sliced thinly, its coarse, dense texture a satisfying contrast to the soft, porridge-like pottage. Each slice was handled carefully, broken or cut into manageable pieces, often used to scoop the meal into the mouths of children, who ate with quiet focus, their small hands and faces marked with streaks of pottage, the repetitive nature of the act calming rather than exciting. In these hours before midday, the village itself moved like a slow, deliberate organism. Animals were tended with the same quiet attention, chickens fed from hand-scooped grains, goats milked with steady hands, the sound of water dripping from pails filling the gaps in conversation, a rhythm mirrored in the slow footsteps of peasants walking along dirt paths to fetch herbs or tend the fields. Conversation, when it occurred, was subdued and functional, a mother reminding a child to wash hands before touching food, a sibling pointing out a cabbage that needed trimming, or a neighbor commenting softly on the weather, whether a forecast of gentle rain or a sun that would dry the soil for planting. These words, measured and unhurried, echoed in the otherwise tranquil space, merging with the sounds of slow cooking, the faint rustle of leaves in the garden, and the low, steady murmur of animals, creating an atmosphere of calm predictability that shaped the peasant's day as much as the food itself. By the time the pottage had thickened sufficiently, the midday meal would be ready, though the process of eating remained quiet and methodical, each bite measured, the flavor understated, a combination of softened grains, tender vegetables, and the faint presence of herbs or meat, the texture uniform but comforting, a warmth that spread slowly through the body, reassuring in its steadiness. Water or thin ale accompanied the meal, sipped slowly to avoid disturbing the rhythm of digestion, while bread continued to serve as both utensil and nourishment, dipped repeatedly into the thickened pottage to absorb flavors and soften textures. After the meal, utensils were scraped and rinsed with care, leftovers stored for later consumption, and the house tidied with deliberate movements, each sweep of the broom or rearrangement of a cooking vessel reinforcing the slow, meditative pattern of life. And so the morning passed into early afternoon, the peasants nourished, their energy conserved. The simple act of preparing and consuming their modest food a reflection of a larger rhythm of life in which patience, repetition, and attention to the smallest details ensured survival, and the quiet, methodical consumption of grains, vegetables, and the occasional small addition of meat or herbs became not only sustenance but a form of gentle, hypnotic meditation, a slow and soothing affirmation of existence in a world measured not by excitement but by the calm, unchanging cadence of daily labor and nourishment. As the afternoon sun moved slowly across the sky, casting long, gentle shadows over the village, the peasants returned to their various chores, each task performed with a quiet, deliberate pace that mirrored the natural rhythm of the day, and with the memory of the midday meal still settling slowly into their bodies, providing the faint warmth and sustenance that allowed them to continue their repetitive labors without haste or complaint. In the fields, the work was methodical, bending over rows of barley, oats, or rye, hands moving slowly to weed, sow, or harvest as dictated by the season, each motion careful to avoid unnecessary fatigue, the fingers brushing against the soil, feeling its texture, moisture, and temperature, an intimate familiarity with the earth that had been cultivated over generations. Between the fields, narrow dirt paths wound their way past small plots of vegetables, herbs, and the occasional orchard, each tree and plant tended according to a schedule that had been passed down, measured in days, weeks, and months rather than hours or minutes, and the repetition of these tasks gave the day a quiet, predictable rhythm that was as soothing as it was essential. Livestock, too, required constant attention. Goats and sheep were guided to pastures with slow, measured steps, their coats brushed free of burrs and insects, and their milking performed with the same careful attention as the preparation of food, the hands working with familiarity, producing a steady flow of warm milk that would be boiled or stored in ceramic vessels for later use. Chickens were fed small portions of grains by hand, their soft clucks blending with the low murmur of conversation. Among the peasants, who spoke in hushed tones, sharing observations about the weather, the state of crops, or the behavior of the animals, all delivered in a gentle, repetitive cadence that required little thought and encouraged a calm continuity of the day's work. Occasionally, a small errand was undertaken, fetching water from the well, delivering a message to a neighbor, or collecting a handful of herbs from the surrounding fields. Each journey was undertaken slowly, with careful observation of the terrain, the plants, and the animals along the way, noting minor changes that could indicate the approach of a different season or the need for a particular task. Back in the household, women and older children continued to prepare for the evening meal, a repetition of the earlier processes: grains sorted and soaked, vegetables washed, peeled, and chopped, herbs minced, and small portions of meat, if available, prepared for slow cooking. The hearth, cleaned and tended, glowed with a gentle warmth, the fire producing soft crackling and curling wisps of smoke that mixed with the aroma of boiling grains and simmering vegetables, creating a sensory environment that was at once constant and calming. Utensils were handled with careful attention, each wooden spoon, bowl, and knife used in a deliberate sequence that minimized waste and maximized efficiency, though efficiency itself was measured not in speed but in the careful preservation of materials, a slow attentiveness that reflected both necessity and the meditative quality of domestic labor. Food storage and preservation remained an ongoing concern. Jars of grains inspected for pests, vegetables stored in cool corners or buried in straw to maintain freshness, and small portions of salted or smoked meat carefully wrapped and hung in smokehouses. The rhythms of these tasks reinforcing a sense of continuity, the knowledge that each careful act contributed to survival over the coming days. By mid-afternoon, the pace of work often slowed further, as the heat of the sun or the gradual fatigue from the morning's efforts prompted a natural languor, a slowing of movement that encouraged reflection and quiet observation. Children, when not assisting in minor chores, would sit or wander slowly along the dirt paths, observing the fields, the animals, and the older villagers at work, their attention drawn to small details. The way a leaf moved in the breeze, the pattern of light on a wall, or the gentle ripples of water in a bucket, their minds soothed by the repetition and predictability of these simple phenomena. Occasionally, the villagers paused to rest, sitting on low benches or the edge of a well, sharing a few quiet words or simply breathing in the gentle rhythm of the afternoon, the warmth of the sun and the faint smell of earth and cooking combining to create an almost hypnotic sense of calm. Preparation for the evening meal continued slowly, the pottage or other grains that had been soaked earlier brought to a gentle boil, vegetables added methodically, each cut observed for quality, and any meat or legumes incorporated with care, producing a thick, aromatic mixture whose texture and smell were both familiar and reassuring, a sensory anchor in a day defined by repetitive labor. Bread was shaped and placed near the hearth to rise, its coarse texture a reminder of the simplicity of the villager's sustenance, and the faint aroma of baking, slow and unhurried, added another layer to the soothing environment of the home. By late afternoon, the village settled into a quiet stillness, interrupted only by the occasional low bleat of a goat, the soft clucking of chickens, or the distant sound of a stream trickling through the fields, all harmonizing with the slow cadence of domestic tasks, the measured steps of villagers on dirt paths, and the gentle, almost imperceptible sway of trees in the breeze.